If someone's genome predicted they were low and they were high, we saw them have quite significant ability to lower LDL cholesterol by lifestyle. However, if their genome predicted them high, we saw no statistically significant signal in those population.
Welcome to Longevity by Design, a podcast designed to give individuals access to the leading scientific information in the field of longevity. The ability to add years to your life and life to your years needs no opinion. Join us as we ask science to take the wheel. In each episode, Dr. Gil Blander joins a co-host and an industry expert in the field of longevity, shining a light and getting the answers to the key question: how can we live a longer, healthier life?
Hello, I'm Dr. Gil Blander. Welcome to Longevity by Design, how to live a longer, healthier life. We are produced by Inside Tracker, your science-based guide to optimize your body from the inside out. Our guest today is Dr. Nathan Price, a leading pioneer in system biology, precision health, and the application of multi-omics and AI to understanding human aging and diseases. Dr. Price is a professor and co-director of the Center for Human Healthspan at the Bach Institute for Research on Aging and chief scientific officer of TORM. His research focuses on defining the molecular network that underlies aging, resilience, and disease predisposition. Dr. Price's work integrates cutting-edge technologies, including genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and computational modeling to detect early biological signals of disease long before clinical symptoms appear. He is also the co-author of The Age of Scientific Wellness, a landmark book that outlines a proactive, data-driven approach to healthcare, combining dense biological data with personalized intervention to optimize health and extend health span. Nathan, welcome to Longevity by Design.
Great. Thanks so much, Gil. Good to be with you again.
Thank you. And before we'll dive in, if you as an audience enjoy Longevity by Design, please like, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. It's helped others to find this scientific first conversation. So Nathan, we interviewed you together with Lee Hood when your book went out, and right. I read it, and I think that it's one of the best books that I read. And again, I strongly recommend everyone that listening to us today to read this book because it's explained a lot of what we'll discuss today. But still listen to this discussion because Nathan have done a lot of work after this book was published. For example, he joined the Bach Institute, that before of that, he have been in other locations. So I think that both reading the book and listening to this episode will be very beneficial for everyone. And I want to start, Nathan, by basically asking you a bit about what is a system biology, and more precisely, you have been a leading advocate for system biology. And why is the reductionist, one biomarker at a time approach, is insufficient for understanding aging and chronic diseases?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think systems biology can best be understood by thinking about molecular biology sort of as a starting point, right? Because in molecular biology, what we did is we really took all the complexity that we see in our bodies in the natural world, and we started to break it down into single components, right? What's a gene? What's a protein? All these kind of factors. Systems biology is really trying to take those puzzle pieces and put them back together. How do all those pieces interact in order to cause the phenomenon that we see, our ability to be alive? How do our systems function as a whole and as a unit? And so from that standpoint, I think it's pretty clear that it's not sufficient for us to only focus on the components if we want to understand anything significant about health, right? No protein carries out your body's metabolism, right? It doesn't carry out a full tissue. It doesn't carry out, all of those things are integrated functions. So it really does require a systems approach for us to even contemplate trying to understand these things in a lot of detail.
Makes sense. And how does the system biology fundamentally change how we think about prevention versus treatment?
So I think the way that I would characterize that, I'm actually going to pull back slightly, because if we think about the great successes in medicine that we had, especially in the 1900s, that really came about because we focused a lot on the things that were killing people in the early 1900s, infectious diseases. And there we were able to take a pretty singular type point of view, right? You find the pathogen, you kill it, right? You get rid of the invading pathogen, you have some hope. And we sort of translated that into like a find the target, drug it type of approach. And we've just been way less successful at the treatment of chronic disease than we were of infectious disease. And I think a lot of the reason for that is because these diseases are complex, they're processes. And so the notion that there is a single target in most of these cases is just not true. And so we need to develop more ability to monitor for how these systems are performing, the functions that they're supposed to carry out, and ways to evaluate that from a systems point of view. I mean, diabetes is kind of a good example, right? It's like the control of glucose is a multifactorial process, and there's lots of ways that it can be attacked or optimized. And even diabetes is more than even just that, but that's an example.
Yeah, so in a way, what you are saying is that we already dealt with the low-hanging fruit to extend our lifespan and health span, and now we don't have a lot of those single reason for a specific disease. And now we need to start dive deeper, and those are more complex, multifactorial, and we need to understand it better. Makes sense. So now when we understand that, I would like to switch gear and discuss your book, The Age of Scientific Wellness. And in the book, you argue that for a shift from reactive medicine to proactive health. So what does scientific wellness term actually mean in practice?
Yeah. So Lee Hood and I, when we were kind of getting this all started in 2013 and, debating a lot of what we would call this or what term we would use, we ended up starting with the word wellness. We couldn't think of another word that better kind of encapsulated not just thinking about disease or the prevention of disease, but trying to become healthier, better, sort of encompassing that. There was a sense that wellness is the right model of thinking, but also had a lot of connotations that were maybe a little bit unscientific, at least in the core science world, it was viewed that way. I remember one review of the book, said something like, "I would never read a book with wellness in the title," or something. I remember that. Okay. But we did kind of attach that moniker of scientific, and it was sort of meant to be a bit of a differentiator or kind of this bridge between two worlds. One, which was the wellness world, which we felt was like oriented the right way in terms of intervening early, focusing on the extension of health and health span. And scientific was like a modifier to say, okay, we're going to bring new tools, because a lot of wellness is also ancient, right? Like yoga is very good for you, it's ancient. Nutrition is very good for you, it's ancient. And so the scientific aspect was also to try to be a little bit of a differentiator of, okay, what are also new things that we can bring that have been made possible by recent scientific advances? So scientific wellness as a term then was basically something that we came up with as a terminology to say, we're trying to aim towards improvement of health and to try to bring the same level of scientific rigor that we've really brought as a community to the study of disease over the last several decades, and try to employ that also in the study of wellness. And that was the basic idea.
Okay, makes a lot of sense, especially that the wellness term is overused and everyone is using it. So try to make it a bit more scientific. And a part of that is, I think that if I understood what you guys are trying to communicate, part of scientific wellness is basically try to use diagnostic and allow us to detect diseases early. So if that's the case, realistically, let's say today, how early can we detect disease using new tools such as multi-omic data?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So that notion in scientific wellness, related to another term, precision health, or whatever people want to call this, is this idea that you can make many, many measurements coupled with forecasting computation AI to try to predict things out. So in some cases, we know you can do prediction far in advance. So for example, Alzheimer's disease through, in this case, imaging, right? But you can do PET imaging looking at the amount of the metabolic processing that's going on. And you get these areas of hypometabolism that can be observed. That's like in 8 years, sort of, in advance. There was a really great clinical trial out of UCLA that showed that. When we looked at people going through a scientific wellness program that we ran before, we had a company called Aravale that we founded a long time ago now, no longer in business. But when we ran thousands of people through there, and we went and looked at like proteomic measures, for example, CCAM5, which is a known measure of metastasis, we saw that elevated a couple years in advance of each of the handful of people that developed metastatic cancer as they were going through the program that we had just legacy data on. So we know that that signals like that come up at least years in advance. So there's definitely signals like that. And some of these diseases, of course, have a very long lead time. Diabetes is well known. You can start to see dysregulation in beta cells, actually even before you start seeing dysregulation then there's certain fat deposit dynamics that can change. Then you see sugar change, you see changes in the control on a CGM, then changes in hemoglobin A1C all the way before you get diabetes. So you definitely can have a long road of at least a decade or more of signals before that. Type 2 diabetes, of course, we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, and I assume that that's true to any system. So as we are thinking about system biology, and that's something that I also really like, you start by having some breakdown of a few components of this network, and then you start to see, because some of them are breaking, you can see some signal if you look at the right part or component of the network. And if you see that, then you have a better chance to intervene early. For example, if someone is getting into diabetic domain or direction, you can change his nutrition, you can change his lifestyle, you can change his exercise, and maybe even intervene with a drug in order to delay the progression of the disease as much as possible. So,
and one of the ways that you can get like potentially very early signals is that you can use genetics as a way to unlock this. So even if you don't have like a super long cohort to follow, which you'd love to have, right? So you can just see what happened decades before and be able to go back. And so with that, but even in the absence of that, if you even just have shorter data, you can take genetics and just separate people by high risk and low risk based on, susceptibility. So you can take Alzheimer's that way, or any disease, right? You can map out. And so what's really fascinating about that is we applied that with like a lot of the deep multi-omic data. So you can look at people where they have no symptoms, but already you start to see differences. Coronary artery disease, for example, if we just took just the genetic predisposition to that, only one protein of the hundreds that we measured came up to be statistically significant across ages in asymptomatic people. And that was PCSK9. Anti-PCSK9, of course, one of the biggest blockbuster drugs. Asthma, one of the proteins came up as being significant as a function of just separating people by genetic risk. IL-33, which is now in, I think, 4 clinical trials as a potential therapeutic target. So that's one of the things that I think is particularly interesting, is as we've unlocked genetics and predisposition, you can already say group A is more likely to get the disease than group B just as a function of genetics. And that is a window, if you couple that with multi-omics, to get at least glimpses of what might be involved in like the earliest risk, because you can do it in cohorts that are not, really long longitudinally. So that was a pretty big unlock when we sort of realized that in the early days of the data analysis.
Yeah, and I think that your point of genetics is spot on. And a couple of episodes ago, I interviewed an expert in genetics that came with a notion, which is a smart notion. He's saying now sequencing the genome is pretty cheap. It used to be $1 billion to sequence one human in 2000. Now it's around $100 or so. And there is already a lot of value. Some of the value is in a single mutation in specific gene, as you discussed before about, you have an infection, let's treat it. But a lot of them starting to get into what we call polygenetic scores, as you discussed about cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and even other condition. And what he said, which makes sense, now we know maybe we have data about maybe 10% of the genetics, but the genetic doesn't change. So it's basically a resource that continue to provide you a value every day. So he said that if I will ask him what is the best investment for everyone, is go and sequence your DNA and start getting more and more update about it every few months, and you might save your life by that. So I think that your point on genetic is really spot on.
And the polygenic risk scores, I think, are really instructive in a few different ways. And the way that we do polygenic risk scores is somewhat limited, right? Because you can only, mostly linear models. There's some new AI methods that are, that have made it, that have improved it. But one of the things I think that's been really fascinating is how much better the cumulative value of those scores continues to get as we've sequenced more and more genomes and as we recognize more and more diversity across populations. And so you really can go from single variants that explain very little, typically, quite a bit less than 1% of the variance, into polygenic risk scores that can explain sometimes like 20%. Now, there's a relatively well-known figure that's where you can look at a distribution, and then there's one person like way outside that distribution, what turns out to be Sean Bradley, who was a 7'6", NBA player. Incredibly, that's the PRS for height, for example, and so we know that these things are pretty predictive, and we're doing a lot of work on that now at the Buck. In fact, I believe that we're the first group in the US, I think, that has access now to the 1 million genomes of the Emirati Genome Program in the UAE. And we have, we're developing now in a collaboration with the Department of Health there and with their big new AI university, MDZ UAI. We are developing polygenic risk scores. And what's exciting out there is that because they have done genome sequencing now on almost all of the citizens of the country, is that you can deploy genomic medicine in a really exciting way. So that's one of our major initiatives in the lab right now. So we're pretty excited about that.
Excellent. So a couple of points based on what you said. First, I think that the data from United Arab Emirates is very important also because it's not a basically Caucasian population. So we're starting to have more diversity because most of the databases are from Caucasian. And the second point that I want to clarify for our audience about polygenic risk scores, and correct me if I said something wrong, Nathan, but polygenic risk scores is basically a way to calculate risk of having a disease or having a high level of a specific biomarker, or having, it can be a risk, but it's also it can be a potential to be 7.6 foot, for example, if for your height. And that's based on polygenic, meaning a lot of genes. So we're looking at a lot of single nucleotide polymorphism or any other changes in the DNA, because most of our DNA is very similar. My DNA and Nathan DNA most likely is 99% similar, but we have small changes. And those small changes are actually make us different, each of us different. And those, if you combine all of them together, as Nathan said, you can get even to 20 or 30% effect of your genetics on a specific trait, like, your level of LDL cholesterol, or your level of fasting glucose, or your level of any other marker, or what is your grip strength, or what is your risk to have low bone mineral density, and so on and so forth. So everything we can, as a scientist, we can basically look at every phenotype, anything that happens in your body, and try to look at the genetics and try to see correlation between people that have specific genetic trait and what happened with their phenotype. So this is a very exciting domain, and I think that everyone that is interested in health and longevity should know what is the polygenic risk score.
And one of the really exciting things there, when we were doing the scientific wellness studies, like LDL cholesterol, as you mentioned, right? This is one that we've looked at quite a lot, is when we were taking people through a wellness program, and then we observed to see who succeeded at lowering LDL cholesterol versus not. And it turns out that if you look at their genomes, it's very predictive about which group of people will shift their LDL and which won't. And the thing that mattered a lot was the gap, or the difference between the actual level and the genetically predicted level. So in other words, if someone's genome predicted they were low and they were high, we saw them have quite significant ability to lower LDL cholesterol by lifestyle. However, if their genome predicted them high, we saw no statistically significant signal in those population. And that was in a study we did on 3,500 people. So, pretty reasonably sized. And so that gap, and as we look at the programs that we're going to be implementing in the UAE, for example, this is one of the elements that will be, part of, what we'll be able to do in that population, right? Is to look at these kind of differences.
Yeah, and a follow-up to that, we at InstaTracker, we did something similar with our population that now is around 100,000, and we have seen similar results. So people that have a high risk for high cholesterol, it's harder for them to improve their LDL cholesterol from baseline to follow-up, but people that have lower risk have a better, much statistical significant better improvement. And that's very encouraging because then you can know whether to recommend someone to have a lifestyle intervention to improve the LDL cholesterol or just telling them, okay, take a statin because lifestyle won't help you.
It's not going to help you. Exactly.
Yeah.
And as we think about multi-omics, this gets to be really interesting too. So in the scientific wellness studies, another thing we looked at, just staying on LDL for a moment, is if people go on a statin. So we took data, again, from these thousands of people we'd measured, and we just did a basic clustering of the microbiome into 4 groups. And what we saw was that in one of those groups that's highly enriched for Bacteroides, they have double the apparent lowering in LDL cholesterol of the other groups. And conversely, one of the downsides of a statin is that you get a 9% increase in the rate of diabetes. And in 2 of the microbiome groups, we saw evidence of increased diabetes markers, and in the other 2, we saw no evidence of it. So that was observational. I got to look at the details of this here soon. I was told that there's I have a paper, I just got to finish reading it, but there's a group out in China that's actually run a trial now on the response of statins relative to these microbiome signatures and found a validation of that. So anyway, the idea being, the high level point of view I want to make here is that integrating these kind of data together is so informative, because if you're just doing a study on lifestyle and you're measuring LDL, you'll see some people respond and some people don't, but you wouldn't know why. You wouldn't know that, oh, it actually relates to this genetic signal and what the gap is. Oh, it actually relates to what the microbiome is. So you will never see that unless you start stacking as many different types of data on top of each other as possible, which is why having these incredibly deeply phenotyped cohorts is essential to really everything we're trying to do for Healthspan. And they've become exponentially more valuable today than they were, a few years ago, I would argue, because you can mine them with AI at such a higher level now than you could before. So I think they just become incredibly useful.
So that's great because you answered a couple of my questions that I wanted to ask, but I want to actually double click on them, and because I think that it's a very important point that the audience need to understand. So in your work, you integrate a lot of multi-omic data, genomic, proteomic, metabolomic, microbiome, clinical data, and many more. And now we are, I think that 2 years ago, we had a revolution that everyone is seeing this revolution today, the AI revolution. So I'm using it, I would say 50 to 100 times a day. I assume that you use it as well. And I hope that everyone in our audience is using it at least as
my annual review back from ChatGPT said I was in the top 0.1% of users. So I felt
oh, that's cool. I haven't.
We hit it all the time with our algorithms. So,
that's really cool.
Get a lot.
And the AI is a game changer also for the multi-omic. And you said that, but if you can explain it a bit more and expand on that, because I think that's important for the audience to understand what AI can do for us as a scientist to help us make sense from this amazing and big database.
Yeah, so many things. But I'm going to talk about 2 big buckets, and this is a big part of what we're focused on in the lab at the Buck Institute. And so first is you can give personalized health guidance. In other words, you can take data from a single individual, and this is partly, we got an up to $52 million award from ARPA-H. Part of that is to build something we call the N-of-1 analyzer that we're pulling this in. And we've built like a little more of what's eventually going to be more of a public facing thing, which we call Healthspan Compass. And so basically what this does is it will take all those pieces of information that you have across multiple domains. You have a lot of information on a single individual. What could I say about health? How do I reason across those data types to say, does this look like it's a precursor to some disease? Does it look like just noise? Does it look like evidence of being particularly healthy? Whatever it is, right? But you can reason on it based on what you know about the proteins or the metabolites or the clinical labs or the microbiome or whatever it is that you see. And this gets into something that I like to call context-aware data analysis. We could come back to that if we want to. But basically the notion that in the past, algorithms have so much just treated numbers as numbers, and now you can add so much more knowledge around it. So that's one big thing, which is the synthesis of lots of what's known to apply to the individual. So AI helps us a ton there. The second big bucket, and we call this effort in our lab Healthspan synthesizer, is the notion that you can automate a lot of the scientific data analysis process. So here, what you can do is you can just build agents, right, that are experts in biochemistry or genetics or microbiome or multi-omics or systems biology or whatever, right? And you can create families of these and you stitch them together in these agentic AI systems such that you can take that multi-omic data and ask and answer questions. So like the prototype we have of synthesizer can do things like you can ask it a question. I could go through some examples, but you can ask it a question and then it will generate an analysis plan, pull out the relevant data, make the figure, do the calculations, make the figures, write you a short paper, and you can do that. So AI has both the application of a lot of known information to the individual, as well as being able to do science to learn it. And when you put those two things together, for us, Compass and Synthesizer, it's like we get a lot of these data. Synthesizers can just go round the clock doing nothing but just trying to learn things and write papers. And then there's other things to like evaluate the papers and stuff like that. But you can just generate knowledge. And then as things get validated, it feeds over into the Compass side, which can then feed into the personalized guidance. And I think the most amazing thing about AI these days is there's probably a number of things I said in there, which people are kind of shaking their head like, yeah, of course we can do that. Where if we think like 4 years ago, that stuff would have been like total sci-fi. And we've gone so quickly to certain capabilities being sci-fi to being like passe almost in a way that I think and what we're always trying to do is just recalibrate ourselves to, okay, we used to have a notion that this style of project should take 4 or 5 years. Is that true anymore? Maybe it should take a month. Maybe, like there's certain things that move fast and there's certain things that don't, right? And I think it's really important.
Yeah, and I think that, again, for the audience to understand, now a professor like yourself in, let's say in the back, can have only 4 or 5 graduate student or postdoc, but actually the output can be of a 50 or so of them because of all the support of AI, especially in a lab that is more computational and less wet bench, because then soon we'll have more robots and all of that, but still it's a lot of work. Here it's the expansion is big. And what is your opinion? Like, what is the value of those agents, if you can say, comparing to a human? So if a human, let's say a postdoc, used to have 100 output of 100, what is it today with all those agents? Is it 500? Is it 1,000? Is it 200?
As a Longevity by Design podcast listener, you understand the value of improving your health for today and for all the years ahead. And if you want to live your healthiest, longest life possible, you need to understand what's going on inside. At Inside Tracker, we take a personalized approach to Healthspan optimization that eliminates guesswork from your wellness plan. Inside Tracker analyzes blood biomarker and DNA data, along with physiomarker data from fitness trackers like Oura Ring, to deliver personalized food, supplement, lifestyle, and exercise recommendations that allow you to take control and improve your health span. And for a limited time, Longevity by Design listeners can get 20% off at the Inside Tracker store. So if you're ready to receive a personal health analysis and data-driven wellness plan to optimize your body for the long haul, then it's time to start inside. Visit insidetracker.com/podcast to get started today. That's insidetracker.com/podcast to get started today.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And I would say, at least in my view right now, we've upped that output pretty substantially. Let's call it 5x or something today.
Wow.
But I think that the potential to go a lot higher than that exists. So one of the things in our lab, and we talk about this quite a lot, like we've basically transitioned as much as possible away from what we used to be like our bread and butter, which was we did tons of data analysis, right? And you sort it out and you write the paper and we're doing a few of those. Like we have a couple of papers that are going out on that, so we're doing a little bit of that, but we've transitioned so much more to building agents for classes of information. So you're sort of trying to solve a certain style of problem in a very general way. And the only reason I say that we haven't like 100x'd or something like that yet is that the AIs themselves are not smart enough yet in terms of like being able to connect it together for like really long term. They're getting better, right? And we know some of the examples out there, right? They're getting better and better. And so it's hard to not imagine that within the next few years, we're able to click these together in such a way that you start to see a bit of runaway progress, especially on these large data sets where you can kind of ask and answer almost infinite, just so many different combinations of questions against them. And so we're really imagining like, can you do like 10 postdoc years a night by just having a huge, array of computers that it's just money and sorting. When there are hallucinations and there are problems, but people make mistakes too. So it's, it's not comparison against the perfect. But these things are getting better and better. There's certain limitations, of course, to LLMs. It's not, in a sense, real reasoning, as we might call it, but it is an approximation based on human text and so forth. And I think there's a long way that we can push these things out. And then, of course, we're very interested in human in the loop in the sense that, there's certain things that we're going to be able to see that maybe the AI, doesn't get, or when it goes down avenues that we don't want it to. And so you can kind of sit on top of that as well. But its ability to synthesize information at a scale that we just couldn't possibly do is vast. And so I think the really important thing right now is that we're going to see, and already are seeing, right, incredible exponential rise in a lot of capabilities, certainly on the computation side and on the information synthesis side. It hasn't yet translated kind of obviously into an exponential rise in therapeutics or an exponential, because there's pieces of that chain that are not going up exponentially. And so to me, the most important kind of systems problem right now is how do we create bridges between the areas that are increasing exponentially such that we can start to get an exponential increase in the output of things that make a difference in Healthspan. And I think that's, it's an incredibly challenging problem, especially as you start thinking about clinical trials, right? Like all the safety issues, all the regulatory issues, there's slow bottlenecks that are not increasing exponentially. But if we can make our predictive ability go up to such a degree that, that hit fraction or the number of times where positive goes up, to a super high degree, that would be, one of those areas. And there's huge race on right across so many of us to try to figure out how do we do that at the highest level. And we are seeing, of course, and then coming back to like personalized recommendations and so forth, this is something that is getting out there, into the world, right? If you look at like wearable companies, like Whoop's got, of course, their version of being able to do the inside tracker, right? Your company's got a version of, walking you through a thorn. My company's got a version of this, like where you can use on the website, like the ability to get advice around products and for health and stuff like that. I mean, there's so many proliferation in our space of these things, where across all these different domains, that it just puts an individual at a level of like a scaffolding of expertise, I feel like, around an individual that lets them really be an architect and a pilot of their health journey in a way you just couldn't do it before, right? I mean, maybe you don't know a million things about biomarkers, but it's an intelligent use of an AI system. You can really delve in and understand a lot more about what are these doing and what should I do and how do I bring it into my lifestyle, and is there how should I change my nutrition? All those kind of things. I mean, there's a whole bunch.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that at least my view from what I'm seeing is that the AI it's very, very fast. It can do some tasks that might took me in the past a year. It can do it in 1 minute. And exactly what you said are the gap that it cannot do it. So you need the bridge. And currently the bridge is us as a human. And in a way, I cannot work 24 hours. So I can come and look at the output of the AI and look at it and give it some direction and then click and another minute. And I cannot come after another minute and do it again because I need to clean my mind. I need to think about it. I need to sleep about it on that and so on. And I think that's currently the barrier is not the AI. The barrier is the us. And how are we integrating with the AI in the best way to actually take advantage of the speed and the quality and the amazing synthesis capability of the AI. That's what I am seeing as the next challenge. How can we do that in a very efficient way? And then, as you said, the drug can be ready much faster. Wellness app or scientific wellness app can come much faster and be cheaper and bigger and better. So there is a lot of potential, but we are still in the transition phase. It's like moving from the horse to the car. It took time, and there were a lot of naysayers and so on and so forth. But I think that we are moving, and everyone should move to the car and get rid of the horse.
And it is moving fast, of course. These generative AIs are the fastest adopted technology in human history, as I think you see all these graphs, right, of comparing the internet and the cell phone, and then, now these AIs have been the highest rate of adoption. So it is something that is, I think very, very exciting. It's new. We're trying to get comfortable with the pace of change across, just, in our lives of how these things are moving. But incredible time. Like one of the concepts I really like to think about a lot, this is from Stuart Kaufman. He has this phrase that I really love called the adjacent possible, right? Which is, there's what's possible, right? Which could be anything, but the adjacent possible is like what just became possible because of what exists today. And I feel like that space, especially around AI, is just moving faster than we've ever seen it before. And I feel like it's the question that we just have to be asking ourselves all the time, which is, what can we do today that used to be hard that's now much easier, much faster? And what does that change about our calculus about, what's possible? And you see this too. I was just going through, or just had lunch with one of our interns. We were just going through a really interesting conversation. I'm blanking the name of the company, right? But you'll probably know it, but it's a $30 billion company. It has 30 employees, right? It's an AI company. Just the notion of how much you can scale, like the effort of a small number of people. It'll come to me in just a second. But anyway, it's Telegraph, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, an app company. But interesting just to think about the scale of what people can build, leveraging a lot of AI tools. I mean, it's a different world that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the bottom line of this section of the discussion is AI is here to stay. Try to use it as much as possible and try to think about how can you deploy it to a task that you used to do and you don't like, and also tasks that you saw that you cannot do and now suddenly you can do. So I encourage everyone to use the AI, and there are so many different tools and so many different ways to use it. I just want to go back for a second, and you discussed before the N of 1 experiment, and just for our audience to explain to them that N of 1 experiment is basically an experiment that you do on one person. And usually when you do experiment, you have, as Nathan described, 1,000, 10,000 people. Here in the opposite, you look at one person, but you have a lot of sampling of this user. For example, you can look at using a CGM, continuous glucose monitoring, you can look at his glucose over a week, but because you received a lot of reading of the glucose actually every 5 minutes, you have a lot of data, so you can start analyzing the specific person and see, hey, he ate oatmeal, his glucose spike. So his glucose oatmeal is good for him or not. But then if you look at a lot of different variables, you can start understanding better the person. And as we said before, each of us is different. So oatmeal might not spike my glucose level, but it might spike a natal level. So everyone should start to understand it themselves better, and then based on that, maybe select a different kind of food or different kind of activity or a different time to go to sleep, and a lot of different things that you can do and basically understand based on N of 1 experience. So that's something very interesting. And again, AI can help a lot because when you have a lot of data, the AI can find some trends and then explain to you what are the trends and maybe what is the intervention to do based on that trend. So N of 1 is a very exciting era now, again, based on AI.
And the AI, I think, because it can provide a lot of context just from so many studies and just what we know about human biology, like, because you can run that N of 1 experiment and, on some variable that you're changing, but you can also leverage, the AI to know, okay, I'm observing this correlation in myself, right? Or it seems like when I do A, like B changes for me, or I feel more energetic if I do this or whatever. And the AI can actually be used to evaluate the likelihood of that connection across many, many other studies or data, right? And as you start having cohorts that are coming through, maybe doing their own N of 1 experiments, you can also think about aggregated N of 1s, or if people, we put a white paper into the NIH recently, to try to do a push for kind of scientific wellness style trials coupled with, really active populations, which are maybe they're struggling with a chronic disease or a particular syndrome, or, and often in some areas that are like really not as understood, to see like if you try to optimize health based on a lot of data, do you see improvement of symptoms? But there's so many of these communities that are kind of just self-forming. And then some of the things that come out are maybe a little anecdotal or whatever. You can imagine, through these kind of modern systems and AIs being able to gather a lot of information about things where people are just trying to deal with a condition that maybe we don't have any good treatments for, and yet be able to share with each other, monitor these kind of things of N of 1s, but actually on the back end have something where you're evaluating more rigorously. Okay, how often did that happen? How plausible is that? What do we know from the literature is the scientific basis for something? There's many things that you could kind of build to turn a lot of what is unstructured right now into more semi-structured or learning environments. And I'm actually quite interested in how we might put something like that together in a way that would really make sense for people, and probably impossible to do without the kind of modern technologies we have where you can, leverage wearables or deep data and combine it together and leverage the context from AI systems and stuff.
Yeah, and I remember when I read your book, you mentioned also their digital twin. So in a way, if I understood you correctly, we are in a race to build a real digital twin of each of us. Basically, do some experiment on the digital twin without us needing, if we're going back to the CGM example, to try and see if oatmeal is good for me or not. Maybe based on the experiment that on the digital twin, we can tell you exactly, Gil, you shouldn't eat oatmeal, you should eat banana, and you should eat avocado. And that's based on your digital twin. That's the way that you think that we are going?
Yeah, I think that, and depending on the scope of the digital twin, right, a digital twin can be more constrained where we say, okay, yeah, we can actually build one today, or it can be very comprehensive about all the different kind of things in your life, which is a Herculean task, so there's the notion of how expansive we think about the concept of the digital twin. But I will say that effective building of digital twins is one of those areas that is a big lever to taking the exponential rise in data and AI interpretability and turning it into something that would probably lead to exponential rises in outcomes and for our health that we actually care about. Because that is an area where your personalized guidance could get way, way better than it is now, for one. And on the development of new therapies in particular, once we can start saying in much more certainty what that's going to do in your body, what combinations are going to be helpful, what combinations are going to be hurtful, like just predictive ability in that space becomes a huge unlock, I think. And so So that race to the deepest, most predictive, tied back to biological mechanism as much as possible, digital twins. And I'll caveat that. I mean, if it's totally predictive and it's not mechanistic, that's still super useful. Well, but I think at current, we don't have enough to just statistically, brute force these. So the more that we can sort of understand these things, I think the better.
Yeah, and I would like to switch gear and talk a bit more about aging. We are already 45 minutes in, and we haven't had a chance. I think that it was a good discussion. So, so you often describe aging as a network level phenomenon. And what does it mean biologically that aging is a network level phenomena?
Yeah. So I think that aging is something that occurs throughout the body. We know that it can occur, at least according to different measurements that we make, right? That it could occur at different rates in different organ systems and things like that. But one of the elements that I really mean by that is if you think about failure of function, and I really like to think especially about functions in our body, and as one of those fails, it very, very often, in aging, so as one of those fails in aging, it puts extra strain on other systems, which put extra strains on other systems. And there's kind of like simple example as people get older, right? So as they age, right, you get a little bit more weakening in, let's say, bladder control at night, right? Very common, right? Older people end up getting up in the middle of the night. They have to, pee more often than they used to. Okay, that's one factor. But there's a network effect to that. Oh, now they're not sleeping as well. Okay, well, now they're not sleeping as well. Oh, well, that has a negative effect on their cognition. Oh, the negative effect on the cognition hurts their sociality. Well, okay, their sociality is a huge driver for it. And on and on and on, right? It could be a million things, right? We could all come up with some chain. And so one of the issues in aging then is it becomes a pretty complex situation because you can't sort of optimize every variable independently. In other words, you can't optimize your sleep without also optimizing, the bladder in the case I gave. Or it could be that you're suffering from acid reflux or something like that, right? So you have to solve that to solve the other thing. You need to add more muscle mass, right, to get better, but maybe your joints are weak. And so like that older person says, okay, I'm going to lift, and then they, hurt themselves. Or like, there's just so many trade-offs and so many ways that as we age, one part of our body is just so connected to every other part. And so if we think about what it would take to really slow down aging or really make a major increase in human health span, it seems like we probably are going to have to deal with there's a lot of complexity. I guess there's a couple ways to think about that. One is that you have all these systems sort of need to operate. There is a hope, right, geroscience hypothesis and so forth, that there's like fundamental aspects of aging that we can turn down that sort of help all those branches at the same time, whether that be DNA repair or something like that. And to some extent, I think that's true. I know there's a company working on an interesting drug, in animals. It seems like it, lowers the amount of DNA damage pretty significantly. And, something like that could be maybe very foundational. But there's just so much connectivity amongst all these systems. So I guess that's partly what I would mean by that.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's going back to the digital twin, because as you said, you go to the gym and you lift a lot of weight, and then your joints are starting to suffer. So maybe you can model it on the digital twin and say, hey, Nathan, you should only go to the gym. You have 90 minutes a week that you can go to the gym. More than 90, it's basically find the equilibrium between the value of the building the muscle and the negative effect on the joint. But we are thinking now on two, but what happens if in real life you have thousands? So how can we find the right balance between going to the gym, having our lunch, exercise, the sleep time, drinking alcohol, and so on and so forth? So if our digital twin can tell us and give us the optimal position of what should we do, maybe we can add a few more years to our life. That's the way that I'm
Yeah,
seeing
and
it.
really understanding the biology of it enough that you'd like to make this as simple as possible. Because to the extent that it requires really complex behaviors, from deployment, it's just going to be really hard. I mean, we'd like to have some knowledge of how to deploy, but would love to develop elements that that make that simpler for people. One other thing on the trade-off, another really good example is, like I spoke at a conference some years ago that Paul Allen sponsored, right? This back when he was alive, but it was on this anti-correlation between things that were beneficial to dementia and bad for cancer. Like a good example of this is mitochondrial function. So if you want to ramp up, so Alzheimer's, and I'll argue a big trigger for that is energy generation in neurons, and you really want to keep that high and efficient. And so mitochondrial health is an important factor. So from that standpoint, you'd want to rev and run your mitochondria for energy, right? That's a positive thing. However, if you're really revving your mitochondria, you create more oxidative radicals. Oxidative radicals are mutagenic, so they're going to cause more DNA damage, for example. So this becomes a really interesting one, right? Because then which is better? So it would depend, like, what's your genetic risk? What's your current profile? How good are you at getting rid of oxidative radicals? If you're super good at it, oh, let's charge up. If you're particularly bad at it, maybe that's a different thing. So anyway, I just, like, that's one I feel like is a very interesting, like, mechanistic one where there's actually kind of a trade-off of where you're going. And like you said, it's not just two things, right? There's 1,000 such things, but it's the AI systems, I think, will give us a much better chance of navigating and hopefully being able to tell someone in a more predictable, systematic way, okay, it's too complicated to try to control everything, but these three things you're actually particularly susceptible to because of these reasons.
Yeah.
Here are solutions that you can do that will make a difference, like as simply as possible. I think that's super.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Another point in that is I don't think that we discussed on the multi-omic earlier in the discussion. I don't see everyone doing proteomic, metabolomic, and microbiome, and so on and so forth. So again, if we were going to the digital twin and somehow we are building, assume what your microbiome is and what is your proteomic and all of that, and based on that, providing you to you those key intervention, then it will be much more accessible to everyone, because I don't see everyone is doing it. Even genetics, I don't see everyone is doing it in the near future. That's my view, at least.
Yeah, I think it depends on what we mean by near future. I do think eventually, and I was going through some data on this recently. I think for prediction of disease, there's a very strong case that, compared to like a lot of the standard clinical labs, as you start really building in deep, precise, like proteomics measures, for example, you can push a lot of these, like, I'm just thinking of the plot I was looking at. But anyway, it's you can push like these accuracy. I'm thinking of the area under the curve, the rock curve or whatever. But if you can take things that are like relatively predictive and you can start making them massively more predictive. And I think there's some regulatory issues to work through. Like there's a bunch of validations to, it's slow to get these things there. But I've seen enough of these kind of data that I'm a pretty big believer that our fidelity and just the degree to which we're going to be able to see things with these higher dimensional data types is going to be really powerful. It's hard for me to imagine if I fast forward 10 years that we're not doing quite a lot of that, and they are coming down in cost. It's getting cheaper. We already have, UAE being one example, right, of a country that's done all the genome sequencing. I think others will eventually follow. They're particularly country well suited to do that. But yeah, I feel like adoption has been slow, but I'm still bullish on the longer, at least the mid-range future. So I think it kind of, is it the next couple of years? No, but I have a hard time believing in 10 years we're not doing quite a lot.
I can give you an example to try to support my assumption. Take a look at the wearables, for example. wearables. I have Aura. I've seen that you have Aura. There are a few million people that have Aura. I don't see 10 billion people using Aura. The same if you look, I have an Apple Watch. There are around 60 million people in the world today that have an Apple Watch. It's not 10 billion. And so I think that we need to understand that those people that are using it are great because they can help us to collect data to build this digital twin. But I don't see, even in the next 10 years, that everyone will have a wearable on his hand. And more than that, doing proteomics, unless it will come from, from the government. If the government will come and say, hey, we are giving, or even the healthcare provider. But even then, there are, look at the COVID vaccination. That was given for free. It was a good cause to do it. And a lot of people say, no, we don't want to do it. We believe that Bill Gates have a chip inside and a lot of stories like that. So I think that we need to, in my belief, in my understanding is that in reality, it will never be 100% of the population. Might be a lot, but not 100%.
I agree with you on that for sure. Like if we're talking about total penetrance and things like that, absolutely. And one of the things that we do think about a lot, and I think is really important, is that we have to have this notion of a pyramid or in our minds of kind of what's the deepest measures, right? But they're harder to get. Not so many people will do them up the pyramid to where, for things that are going to be really low cost, really, maybe it should be an inverted pyramid anyway, but it's like, at a really low cost, much more ubiquitous. Like one of the areas that I'm quite fascinated with right now and a bunch of companies are emerging on is like voice analysis, right? Just doing deep analysis of harmonics and kind of hidden factors within voice, for example, that are diagnostic of different diseases or different conditions. And so as we learn from that base that is doing the denser omics, I do agree with this point, which is we want to always be pushing it towards what's a cheaper, more passive way to get that same information?
Exactly.
That you can get, and you lose a little fidelity. It's not quite as good, but you learn a lot of the population. It triggers, hey, you won't, something might be happening. You might really want to get in and.
And your voice example is great because if you think about it, there are 4.6 billion people that have a smartphone today. And all of them, in a way, you can record the voice. So that's something that is available for, let's say, half of the population of the world that you can utilize as of today, while proteomics, I don't know the number, but let's say maybe there are a couple of millions of people that have proteomics. So I think that that's what I'm trying to convey, that proteomics is great and it will help us to build the better models for digital twin and other, and maybe someone that was, not maybe, even today, someone that have diagnosed with cancer, maybe will run proteomics in order to understand better what are the treatment, all of that. But I don't see it as something that everyone in the world will have it in the next.
I don't think it'll be what everyone in the world will do, but I do think it's going to become, I think it will become a much bigger part of healthcare because it's really almost zero of healthcare today.
Yeah.
I do think it's going to start to be something, that if you're with, if you've got good healthcare, if you're with, relative, like a good physician that's up to date on things, like I think that level, where we start seeing like really millions of people, maybe tens of millions of people, starting to do that. I think that is going to happen. But I agree. Like, this in the commercial space too, right? I mean, we get into these kind of things. Like every half of a second that something takes longer on a website, right? You lose like half the people or something like this or more, right? It's like every little bit of friction is a major barrier to mass adoption.
Yeah.
So it really is on. And that's why as we talk about Healthspan and things that have to be implemented, what they have to do, as I think about, the implementation of something like scientific wellness, the onus is really on you to make it's just got to become easy. It's got to become something that people like to do if you're ever going to get it to really massive scale.
Yeah.
It's hard to say anything, as we both know.
Yeah. To your point, every click that a user need to do on the app or on the website, you lose 90% of the population. So
every click.
It is crazy. So it's so important to have the UI UX in the right way, because if not, after 2 clicks, you lost 99% of your users. So Nathan, I have plenty of questions to ask you, but we are short in time. So I have a few questions. I call it a quick, rapid fire. And basically question that I want to ask you and receive your answer. The first one is one misconception about aging biology you most like to correct.
Oh, I guess the biggest misconception that I'd most like to correct is one that maybe I'm not happy about, but I don't think the solution for aging is right around the corner. And so I think some people feel that way. I would like to say that it is, and I would love to be wrong about this, but I would say, yeah, I think it's a lot of complexity ahead of us to sort this out.
Yeah, and I agree with you with that. The next one is one metric or a signal you believe will define the future of health monitoring.
So I think that it's going to be a variety of signals interpreted by AI on a personalized basis. If I had to pick one measure though right now, I guess I would pick, VO2 max is probably the number one, useful integrative signal today. And I think there'll be, signals like that, but I am very excited about multifunctionality measurements.
Okay, and the next one is one longevity trend you are skeptical about.
Let's see, longevity trend that I'm skeptical about. Oh, this one may or may, this might be more wishful thinking. I don't think that the data around cold plunge is nearly as strong as, for example, the data around like sauna or something on the opposite. I will caveat that with that I love the sauna and I hate the cold plunge. So there's that.
So it's a personal preference.
I've been in it for a while, but I'm not fully convinced.
Okay. And the last one is one daily habit with outsized impact on long-term health.
Sauna, actually, I'll go with that one. Because if you look at the data, out of Finland where they compared people that use the sauna 4 to 7 times a week versus once a week, the data on that is incredibly striking. 50% reduction in cardiovascular disease, 60% reduction in dementias, seems to be really big, substantial benefit. And even if that comes down some, if we were running a long-term RCT, the observed effects there seem to be very strong. And I would couple it with electrolytes or something afterwards to, not lose all those salts, but
don't faint after that.
Faint after, but it seems to be very good. That's one I've really started to do a lot. Seems to make a big difference.
Sounds great. And my last question to you is, if our listeners remember just one idea from your work on system biology and precision health, what should it be?
I think if you just remember one thing, it is that your biology, while we share a lot with other people, your biology is, in the combinations, is very unique. And so the capability now to delve in on that and really kind of take a journey on your own health span, especially with the AI tools and the different access that you have to measurements and so forth, this is really an approachable journey, a fun thing you can do in your life that was not really possible for earlier generations.
So it's going back to it's your time to do an N of 1 experiments.
Go on, do the N of 1, learn your
Very cool. So Nathan, thank you so much for deeply sourceful conversation on how system biology and scientific wellness can redefine the future of health and wellness and longevity. Your work challenges us to move beyond treating disease and toward continuous optimizing human health. For our audience, if you enjoyed today's episode on Longevity by Design, please like, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. It's help others discover this conversation. Thanks for tuning into Longevity by Design, produced by Inside Tracker. We'll see you next time. And again, thank you so much, Nathan. That was a great conversation.
Great to talk with you, Gil. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Longevity by Design. Please subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Longevity by Design is powered by Inside Tracker, a personalized health optimization platform that helps people improve their lives by improving their bodies from the inside out, using personalized, science-backed recommendations for nutrition, supplements, and lifestyle changes. To learn more, visit insidetracker.com/podcasts.